is still carbon producing. See, the only way we can ever achieve that is to actually embrace either solar PV, which is renewable, or nuclear energy. Now here is a simple setup of a nuclear reactor. You have the reactor vessel and then your power generation systems. Now, ever since 2011, I guess nuclear has been having a very bad image due to Fukushima, and I don't blame you, especially here in Singapore. But in the United States, there have been multiple nuclear energy startups popping up all over the place. Two prominent ones are Transatomic Power based in Boston and TerraPower based in New York City, both of which are researching what is known as the Gen 4 reactors. What essentially this means is that they are going to take out the reactor vessel of the aging systems and totally replace it with the new Gen 4 systems. The Gen 4 systems are these 6 here. These systems were chosen because they have higher safety value, higher accident tolerance, and they are able to produce more energy as compared to the current system. But for Singapore's case, I like to home in on this one, the molten salt reactor. Why? Simple. It has the highest passive safety among all the 6 reactors, which means you don't have to have active systems running. The systems already have inbuilt protection that do not require any manpower to watch it. Second of all, because of that, it has walk-away safety. You can literally have an accident and walk away and it will not have a problem. And lastly, the system can be tweaked to burn radioactive waste that is produced from the fission process, producing even more power. And you even reduce the number of radioactive waste that's produced by a significant amount. And when we talk about nuclear, a lot of people, especially in ASEAN, will wonder about the nuclear weapons, which could destabilize geopolitics in the area. Well, I'm glad to say with the molten salt reactor, the properties of the fuel ensure that nuclear weapons is not feasible, or even possible. So you think about it, you have energy, no weapons. Shock, right? As well as say in Singapore. But then you ask yourself the question, can it be used in Singapore? Well, at Transatomic Power, they have been researching a modular concept reactor, which means that it's small size and compact, which is good for Singapore. Second of all, you can have an output of about 520 megawatt electricity. But this, as they say in their white paper, can be tweaked to suit the country's purpose. Next, they have also been researching on the ability to integrate nuclear reactors into smart grids, and that is important for Singapore's case. And lastly, it's runaway reaction improbable, as I stated before, and because of that, there is no contamination of soil or groundwater as a possibility. And also at MIT, they're researching something known as the floating nuclear reactor facility, which is important for Singapore because we have limited land space, so this becomes a viable option. But then you ask yourself this question, all these benefits, why aren't we employing it in Singapore, even researching it? That's the problem. The risk reactor is at experimental stage at best, but it is perfect for Singapore because Singapore can hitch along this early ride and research on this reactor to be able to be integrated into Singapore's system directly. We don't have to wait for other countries to employ it. We can research it first in Singapore and cut the amount of time down. And so this is Singapore Smart Grid, which is projected to be implemented in Singapore to try and reduce carbon emissions. Maybe one day, we can add this symbol as well, to have nuclear energy as part of the smart grid and therefore totally remove carbon from the system. So isn't that good? We can cut down carbon, we become more environmentally friendly, and plus, nuclear energy is one of the cheapest sources of electricity in the world, with France having a very low electricity tariff rate. It's great, isn't it? Singaporeans, we love to save money. Wouldn't you want this? So I hope that with this presentation, I will inspire many more of you to come and join this nuclear race and help Singapore move along this path. After all, if anything, at least the possibility of cheaper electricity prices should appeal to all of you as Singaporeans. I know it appeals to me as well. So, thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, one more round of applause for our student presenters for their great presentations. And I think thank you to their teachers as well. I'm sure they've put in a lot of effort working together with the students. A round of applause for our teachers. And now it is my honor to invite our guest of honor, Minister S. Iswaran, Minister for Trade and Industry, Ms. Goh Swee Chen, Chairperson, Shell Singapore, and Mr. Lauren Maiafe, Head of Power Conversion, Southeast Asia Regional Hub, ABB, on stage for a dialogue session. Minister, Ms. Goh, and Mr. Maiafe, please. Good morning to all of you. Hope you are comfortable in these seats. Let's wait for everyone to get comfortable. We would like to actually start off by asking if you have any comments on our student presentations that you've actually just heard. Some very interesting stuff there. So maybe comments, questions, or maybe some words of encouragement. Minister, would you like to start off?
Okay.
Sorry to put you in the spot.
No free lunch. Okay. Well, first of all, very good to see all of you guys here. This is one of the most fun parts of this, for me, the International Energy Week, because we get to hear views on energy matters from a very fresh perspective. So I thoroughly enjoyed all your presentations. I thought the thing that struck me was the three presentations touch on three quite important aspects of our energy policy and the work that we are doing. One pertains to the whole area of demand and efficiency and conservation of energy. And what they've done in IT College Central, and in fact in many of our government buildings and also in the private sector, is I think a very good example for many others to consider. Because whilst we talk about all these other aspects in terms of how we can source for energy in different ways and so on, one of the most proven and effective ways to manage our carbon footprint and to ensure the energy take remains sustainable is really on the demand side and managing energy consumption in an efficient way. So I thought that was a very useful example. And the buildings that we have are a big part of the consumption process, but it's not just buildings, it's also the industry and how they use energy. The other two aspects about, which I thought were interesting, pertaining to different sources of energy. So I think, Matthew, you may have raised some eyebrows about nuclear. You're very passionate about it. And I think we can talk about this some more. I think it would be a useful discussion point going forward rather than me say everything up front. But the key point is we must look for alternative sources beyond what we rely on today, whether it's gas or oil-based or some countries use coal and so on. So that I thought was a useful aspect of the supply side and how we have to diversify our sources. And finally, on electric vehicles, and again, I think you'll find that there's a very interesting debate in Singapore and in many other countries in the world, because you made some important assertions about electric vehicles and their efficiency and their, how clean they are and so on. And the key thing is, it's not just that you can't just look at the electric car, you've got to look at how you generate the electricity. Yeah. So you can have a very clean car, but if I use coal, very dirty coal to generate the electricity, actually it's not very useful at all. So you've got to look at the entire system and see how this works out. But I think the point you made about looking at applications and new areas, this is really the exciting part, because we are doing work on electric vehicles in Singapore. We are looking at other aspects of how we can enhance the usage of electricity in our broader context and keep our carbon footprint down. So this is a useful sort of way of thinking about issues, and electric vehicles is one possible solution, but I want to just stress that it may not be the silver bullet in the way we are looking at things. All right, I can hand it over to the others.
Yeah, maybe I take a different angle here. When I was young and graduating, I've always been told that as you get into the workforce, the world is your oyster. And, I get into the workforce in the 80s, and I was always wondering what that meant, because the access to the world wasn't as big as what it is today. And when I listened to the presentation by the three teams and individuals, the world truly is your oyster. The examples that you have brought up are not examples just in Singapore, but they are examples from all over the world. The knowledge that you gain are from all over the world. And that is just such an exciting time for you to be in. And I'm thinking about old folks like me. One of the things, and as I think about some of the ideas, the thoughts and the biases that goes through my mind, and I think for people like me that is in a position to help either bring forward an idea or kill an idea, as I listen to you talk, one thing that I realized that we must all do, for those of us who are in positions that we can make decisions, is to keep a really open mind about all the different ideas that are presented. Who knows, right? One idea could actually make it very big. So I encourage you, don't ever give up. If there is someone who tells you that your idea is not a good one, move on and go to the next one. Huh? And just to finish up with one, we are all very used to Apple and the technology now. I bet more than half of the room has some form of an Apple gadget. And how that started, the Apple interface started in Fuji Xerox. A team of engineers developed it, and Xerox at that time took a look at that and said, no way people would be interested in a technology like that. And the engineers who developed it heard of Steve Jobs, invited him for a demonstration, and that history was established. So I just want to say, if you have an idea, don't give up.
Thank you. Mr. Mayafi?
Yes, from my side, first of all, I would like to congratulate the students because you're showing a lot of power and motivation in the presentation that you have done. And then this is very good for me, especially Matthew, to talk about nuclear with such power nowadays is quite a challenging task, I think. And, you know, congratulations to you. You believe into this. It's very nice that you dare to push the idea forwards because nuclear has this negative taste, as you mentioned, after Fukushima. I'm also very happy to see the three presentations because, as Minister Swaran mentioned, talks on different aspects of how we use energy and how we produce energy. Electrical vehicles, it's a technology that we already have today. Of course, it can be improved, and there are the whole ecosystem needs to be there to work properly. I would wish that Asia moves a bit faster maybe on electrical vehicles. In Europe, there is a lot of things happening, in the US as well. Asia is still, finding the way, but it's coming now, and ABB is involved in this, so every week I'm interested to see what's going on in this area, as well as the electric buses. The presentation on energy efficiency is also a very, very interesting topic and point when we talk about energy, because you have to look at what options we have to produce more energy, but you also need to consider what can you do to save energy. And that both ends of the lines, you can do something. And nuclear energy can be an option, and I think people need to have this debate because nowadays it's very easy through social media or whatever to voice a negative opinion about something. And you can have a debate and then you will find people opposed to everything. Don't want solar because it takes too much space, don't want hydro power plant because it's cutting rivers and flooding areas, don't want windmills because it's dangerous for the birds, and things like this. And at the end, you have no options at all. So it's really important to have this debate and somehow find a way, at least as a community, to agree on what is the best fit for one particular area. And I count on all you young people to push older people to maybe change the mind a little bit and move away from traditional approach for this. So I think the three presentations are a very good choice and show a very nice aspect of the whole discussion chain that we should have and the debate that we should have.
Thank you so much for your comments. Students, look how you've impressed our guests. One more round of applause for our student presentations. Now, as you know, we actually did a snap poll earlier on this morning. So we would like to actually recap the questions and also reveal live the results. So students, are you ready to be accountable for your actions? All right. The polls basically fall into three main categories. We have the first one, energy sources. Second one, energy consumption and conservation. And then the last one, career opportunities in the energy sector. All right, let's go into the first set of questions on energy sources, and let's look at the results. The first question, why is sourcing for energy a challenge for Singapore? We have 80% saying that it's because we are a small country without any natural resources. Interesting. All right, next question. What energy sources could Singapore consider using more of for electricity generation in the future? Once again, an overwhelming 76% for renewables, solar, wind, and biomass. Nuclear getting a little bit of love there. All right, and the third question, let's see our results. What is the percentage of Singapore's electricity generated by natural gas? 44.4% have said about 95%. All right, I guess as you mull over these results, students, thank you for participating. Okay, maybe ladies first this time. Ms. Goh, do you have any comments on these results that our students have done?
Well, it's an oil and gas company. I guess it's my duty to. I was surprised to see that nuclear. The group believed that nuclear is a better source of energy than gas. So Matthew, I wonder, after your presentation, that number might be higher. But I want to say something about gas and just the energy mix. I talked earlier this morning about the energy challenge, and I said that 3 billion of the world population still do not have access to modern energy. Singapore does not have that problem. We all have access to modern energy. We are in a very fortunate position. However, though, I think one of the things that is known is that it has one of the highest cost of energy. And being very urban, a large percentage, in fact, I would say 100% of our population lives in the city. It does pose some challenges when it comes to climate change. And you mentioned that by the year 2030, our commitment is a 36% reduction in emission. And as you look at this energy transition from where we are now to where we say in the year 2030, and we had seen earlier on, there was one question that asked from the 60s till now, what is the fall of increase of energy use? It's about 50 times. So you can see this increase, the use of energy will continue to increase. And the thing that I would say is we need to, it's not one single source of energy that will meet needs. We need, in this whole energy landscape, we need to consider multiple sources of energy. Coal, although not in Singapore, but in our region, continues to be a large source of electricity generation. Gas, I believe, it's a viable source as well. So I think I will leave it at this stage.
Thank you very much. Any one of our guests want to comment?
Yeah, maybe I will.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mr. Maifei.
Pick it up. I will not debate on gas versus nuclear. Shell is a good customer of ABB, by the way, so
Thank you.
I don't want to challenge Ms. Go here. But I would combine the first and the second question, because I think there's something interesting there. If you say, 80% are seeing the issue of natural resources for Singapore. There's no natural resources. You have to find ways to source your energy elsewhere. And then looking at a lot of you saying that renewable solar is a good solution for Singapore. I would like to push you a little bit beyond the borders of Singapore and consider as well that in terms of energy production and energy consumption, it doesn't mean that everything has to happen in Singapore. Singapore happens to be a very nice place with a very stable grid, and it's a very good model for the region. And I mentioned this in a panel discussion yesterday, and I think it's also very applicable here. It's that you can basically consider this as a regional challenge and also look at how you can better interconnect the different grids in the region. If you don't have certain type of energy available in Singapore, maybe it's available in Malaysia or in Indonesia or in Thailand, and you can interconnect the grid. And by this, leveraging on resources available at the regional level can really help each one of the countries in ASEAN to solve their own bits and challenges in terms of energy. So even though definitely each country for safety reason, political reason, intends to make sure that they can be independent if things go bad, it's also good to consider integration. And if you look at Europe nowadays, nobody would consider energy policy just for one single country. Everything is interconnected anyway. You trip one power plant, and by the way, nuclear power plants are very big, so when they trip, they disturb the grid quite a lot. But you trip one nuclear power plant in Switzerland or in France, this is affecting the grid up all the way to Germany and Luxembourg. So, to look at things so locally nowadays with grid interconnection, it's a bit outdated, I would say. But in ASEAN region, there is still a lot to do because the grid interconnection is still weak. But definitely for me, I see a good potential there to link the different countries together. And there are projects on the way to do that. So it's progressing. And that will help renewable energy a lot. Because if you don't have land in Singapore, but you have a big piece of land in Malaysia, you can pull a cable next to the water pipe and bring power to Singapore, and vice versa between Indonesia and Malaysia, Singapore as well. The technology is already there, so you need to have more will maybe to go and do this integration faster, but it started, and that will help definitely with the energy bit.
So I think they've covered a lot of points, so I just want to augment. First, we already import some things from the region like water.
Yeah.
And so I think the reality is the comparison with Europe and how integrated Europe is compared to ASEAN. There are regional variations which are quite significant. Mm-hmm. But I think in terms of the future, certainly this is one of the things we should be looking at, how we can link up better. But the systems in ASEAN, in the different countries, are so divergent in terms of regulations, in terms of what how the industry is evolving. This will remain a challenge for quite some time, which is why even as we look at larger regional and broader ideas, we need to address Singapore's own issues in a very specific way, although we already have some interconnect with Malaysia. So I just wanted to say, when I saw the survey results, the thing that stood out for me was that about 12.8% said nuclear is a good idea. I know at least one person who voted for nuclear. I'm not sure who else did in this room. But I think the interesting point to take away from this is when you're looking at all these different sources of energy, all of them, none of them really is an absolute good. There are plus points and there are minus points. And you've got to take all of this into account. And that's why you talk about an energy mix and about keeping options open. So if you take whether it's oil or gas, with due respect to Shell, the thing would be that these are the conventional sources. They're available in large quantities in the world today. It's easily accessible. You can diversify it geographically. But the downside, to some extent, is the carbon footprint that you incur as a result, right? And this is something that's become more and more significant. So in December this year in Paris, all the countries are going to get together and talk about climate change and what we can do in terms of carbon constraints. But if you look at renewables, which almost 80%, 4 out of 5 of you think that renewables is the way to go, I can see the appeal because of the fact that it's seen to be more environmentally friendly. But the downside is that all the renewables, they all pose different types of challenges, starting with the issue of intermittency. So if it's a solar system, you need a system that, if you want a base load that is regular, I can't tell a company that comes and runs a wafer fab, when the sun shines, you can operate, when there's behind the cloud, you can't, right? You need to work on it, and you've got to ensure sustainability. So you need a combination of these. So typically you find that solar systems are complemented by some, whether it's gas-based or other systems, so that they can produce a steady stream of energy. And then when you look at some of the other ideas pertaining to, the ones that are particularly challenging are coal. And because coal, especially because of its very high carbon footprint relative to the other sources, but it's also very appealing because, as others have said, in this region, in Asia and in particular Southeast Asia, but also in Europe, I mean, even the Germans are using coal. So coal has a lot of appeal because it's available in plentiful supply and the cost is low. And you don't factor in the cost of carbon. So I think the enlightened approach to this is really to say that we should keep our options open, allow ourselves the flexibility to bring in different combinations. Of course, there are some domestic constraints. Singapore, we really have some limits as to how much we can do. If we cover, somebody told me, and I think this is based on, if you cover all of Singapore with solar cells, PV cells, we can probably meet about 10% of our peak demand, something like that. When technology will improve, you may get more out of it, but it doesn't mean solar cannot be a part of our mix, and in fact, it's becoming part of our mix. On nuclear energy, for example, what we have said is, and we are doing is, we have got programs which are basically educating and preparing a pool of people who can understand the technology, because whether it is used in Singapore or in the region, we need to understand what the technology is, what are the benefits, what are the risks, how it can work for us in Singapore as well. And we need people who understand this so that we can work with them. So that's why we've started this program on nuclear energy as well, and those who are interested can sign up. EMA will be able to give you more information, and you can go on and do postgraduate studies on this as well. It's something that's, I think, quite an interesting area. So the point I want to make at the end of the day is, when I see the survey, it's great that you understand the issues, but when you look at energy mix and the policy makers in government and working with the industry, we have to look at a way to find a combination that is sustainable. The combination and the mix may change over time, depending on how technologies move and so on, but we still need to work at a combination of these sources to meet our needs.
Thank you very much for your comments. We will be taking questions after we go through all the survey results. So if you have any questions, please write them down. We're going to have a Q&A later, yeah? All right, now moving on to the second section, basically on energy consumption and conservation. Let's see the results. What do you think is most important for Singapore's energy policy? We have a 64.8% saying environmental sustainability is very important. We also have energy security, and not so popular is economic competitiveness. Okay, guys. All right. Next question. Which two sectors are the top energy consumers in Singapore? Kind of like a balance right there. I think households and industry, as well as industry and commercial activities, have kind of like an equal 40-ish%. And lastly, the last question. Did you know that we use blank times more electricity today than we did 50 years ago? What's going on here? 36% 100 times, 31.4% 50 times. All right, our guests, take some time to take a look.
Let me come in on this. As I'm in the Ministry of Trade and Industry, the fact that only 8% of you think economic competitiveness is important really bothers me. I want to say that up front. Because you can have a very environmentally sustainable economy, which is also very secure in terms of sources of energy, but if you're not competitive, you ain't doing a lot in your country and your economy. And that means jobs, opportunities are all going to be a lot less. So I hope you will appreciate that when we look at this, the economic competitiveness aspect is just as important. In fact, the way our policy makers frame it is, it's the three elements must come together. Environmental sustainability, economic competitiveness, and energy security. And you need all three legs to work and be strong in order to have something that is durable and can take us through 5, 10, 15, whatever time period you're looking at. If you have one of these that's not so strong, then the durability, in other words, how much this can support your activities for the future, will become questionable. So if it's environmentally, you're degrading your environment, but you're very competitive. So if I burn a lot of coal, so I degrade my environment, but very competitive economically, in terms of price, and secure because I got plentiful supply, it's not going to work for us. Same way, you can have a lot of renewables, very sustainable, but if it is not priced competitively and if it cannot sustain economic activity and industrial activity, it's a problem. So the point I'm making is you need all three to work together. So it really would have been nice to see 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 for that. But since it's so distorted, I think you should take that point on, because it is an important consideration for all of us as Singaporeans, but in any country really, you do need your economy to be competitive in order to be able to generate the jobs and do all the things that we are aspiring to do.
Any further comments?
Yeah, I agree with the minister completely. The three legs has to stand on its own on equal weighting, and as a company that has very significant operations here in Singapore, a very large consumer of energy competitiveness is important. If I may give some statistics here. We have in Pulau Bukom, it's the largest Shell wholly owned refinery in the world. 90% of what we produce gets exported out. And when you think of that context, the competitiveness of the fuel that we use or the power source that we use become very critical. And why is it critical? The operations here, just in terms of, we earlier on, both Lauren and I were trying to recruit the entire room to work for our companies. In Shell's context, we hire 3,200 people. On a peak project period, we hire an additional 10,000 from contractors, third party. And you imagine this creates jobs in Singapore, jobs that people such as yourself could gain experience. So please do consider competitiveness as important as energy security and policies. Just on policies, if I may also say something, and it's a discussion that I had with Matthew earlier on. The energy industry, it has a very strong technical component, has a very strong technical innovation component. But the other aspect of energy is the geopolitics. The international oil companies, so when you look at Exxon, Shell, Total, all these companies combined, the hydrocarbon in the ground, we can only claim about less than 20% of what's totally available in the world. So we have to work with politicians, we have to work with NGOs, communities, to get access to the energy sources that is in the ground, in the deep sea, in the air. And therefore, as you all think about, I could sense this great passion in the solutions and the innovations that you have. But the one skill that you need to consider developing is these social influencing skills. Because if you have a great idea, you must be able to sell it. If you want something that is part of what your idea needs, you must be able to influence the other party to work with you. And in the energy sector, the stakes are quite high. You're working with politicians and owners of resources. So balance out that technology skills with the social skills that are required for you to succeed in the industry.
If I just add a bit on my side, to me, it's very good to see so many people motivated for renewable energy, but the competitiveness, definitely, that's somewhere where I would question the results of the poll. But let's put it like this: it's, you are studying, fresh, young, challenging the world, and that's good. It's good to have young people challenging older people, and that's the way the world is working. Not to sound pessimistic and sound like an old guy, I would still tell you that, once you leave university or you leave school, reality check comes. You will be faced with the real issues, not that you are not faced today with the real issues, but you will realize that there are conditions and a lot of things that make the whole equation quite complex.